Yes, again, welcome to this this evening's discussion on what's the state of the Nanny State, and I hand over to Simon Clark to formally introduce proceedings.
Right, good evening, everyone. I'm sweltering here. I've actually got a fan on, believe it or not. Now, can I just check? I know that Natalie has now joined us. I just want to ask, because we haven't discussed this. Natalie, are you all right to speak first? Because if not, then we can move things around a bit. I'm not quite sure where you're calling us from, but can you indicate if you're okay to speak first?
I'm absolutely fine to speak first. Yep, tell me how long.
It'd be 3-4 minutes. Basically, each speaker is going to speak for 3-4 minutes on the sort of general subject of the nanny state and how they sort of see government intervention in terms of changing our lifestyles, whether the government should intervene more, whether the government should intervene less. And what we'll do, we'll start with Natalie, then we'll have Brian, then we'll have Tam, and then we will have Claire. But I'll introduce you all properly just before you're about to speak. First of all, thanks to Rob. I should mention that a few years ago, almost a decade ago now, in fact, Rob wrote a book called Panic on a Plate: How Society Developed an Eating Disorder. So he is eminently well qualified, not just to moderate this discussion, but also to talk about the issue of obesity. And he will no doubt be chipping with a few thoughts and questions of his own this evening. Now, tonight's discussion was prompted by two things. First of all, the government's plans to fight obesity, which were announced a couple of weeks ago. They include a ban on junk food advertising across television and online prior to the 9 o'clock watershed. They're going to ban buy one, get one free deals on so-called unhealthy food. And there will be restrictions on where high in fat, sugar or salt products can be promoted in store, including a ban on chocolates, crisps and sweets being sold at the checkout. Restaurant, cafe or takeaway chains with more than 250 employees, so companies like McDonald's, will be required to label the calories of their meals on the menu, and the government has launched a consultation on plans to provide the same information for alcoholic drinks. Now, the second issue, of course, is the war on smoking, which continues uninterrupted, it seems, by the coronavirus crisis. 3 weeks ago, a group of peers tried to force the government to introduce a national ban on smoking in all new seating areas outside pubs, cafes and restaurants. Now, although they didn't succeed, last week Manchester City Council announced plans to do it anyway, regardless of the effect it might have on pubs and cafes that are struggling to recover from lockdown. Also earlier this year, Smoke Free Action, which is an umbrella group campaigning to make smoking history, they published a roadmap to a smoke-free 2030, and a group of peers recently urged the government to explain, quote, how they plan to achieve their objective of making England smoke-free by 2030. So tonight's meeting therefore invites our speakers and our audience to discuss how far the government should intervene to save us from ourselves and protect other people from our lifestyles. Now, I'm delighted to welcome our first speaker, Baroness Bennett of Manor Castle, better known to many of you as Natalie Bennett, leader of the Green Party of England and Wales from 2012 to 2016. In a previous life, Natalie was a journalist working on the Times and the Bangkok Post. She was also editor of the Guardian Weekly. She currently writes a weekly column for the Left Foot Forward blog and has been a member of the House of Lords since October last year. Now, on the question of smoking, Natalie wants the government to force the tobacco companies to pay into a fund that would help people quit smoking tobacco. She has written several articles recently about the government's anti-obesity strategy, suggesting that it lacks urgency and ambition. Anyway, we might not agree with everything Natalie says this evening, but I'm absolutely delighted she could join us, not least because I understand she is currently travelling in France. So welcome, Natalie. And perhaps you could start by telling us exactly where you are.
Yes, I'm in Burgundy, and this is theoretically the last thing I'm doing before I go on holiday, although that, holidays and me don't necessarily fit together very well. I believe in a work-life balance, I just don't always have one. But, I'm always delighted to engage with people with different points of view.
Great. Well, Natalie, you've got 3 or 4 minutes to make your case. On you go.
Okay, well, I want to start by saying that I think the UK in successive governments has done a great job of being a nanny state, that being a nanny for the profits of multinational companies, tobacco companies, fast food companies. They've ensured a environment in the UK, a social environment, an economic environment that has allowed those companies' profits to flourish, while the health of the nation has gone down the gurgler. And we've seen that, for example, COVID-19 has highlighted the impact on obesity and public health, the fact that we have a huge problem with the issue of obesity. We've seen it, with the fact with air pollution, and the fact that we know how much our air pollution while contributing to oil company profits. So what I think is that we should regard a government's responsibility as being to act on behalf of the people for the well-being and health of the people. And that's demonstrably what successive British governments have not been doing. If we think of the power imbalance between, let's say, a single mum works 2 or 3 hours, 0 hours contracts, struggling to make ends meet, and she goes into a supermarket. And of course, as I once heard a very excellent speaker from Greenpeace say, no one goes into the supermarket and says, I want to buy really unhealthy food for my children. But everything is stacked against that mother, both in terms of poverty and inadequate wages, issues that are perhaps a bit broader than we want to address this evening, but also in terms of the fact that the labelling in those supermarkets is unclear, somewhere between unclear and deeply misleading. There's a whole lot of information being spread about the fact that there's a chicken with a lovely picture of a bucolic farmyard with a chicken picking its way around in the dirt. Of course, that's actually very likely being produced under extreme factory farm conditions, but it's very hard to know that unless you've got a lot of time and energy in research, and of course the money to buy something that might be produced under better conditions. You have seen all the adverts and have been told that breakfast cereal is really healthy for you, when actually that's absolutely far from the truth. It's stuffed with fat and sugar, yet you've been misled, and the government has allowed those multinational companies with all of their huge advertising budgets to mislead you. And of course, you've also been told that the supermarket is the cheapest place to shop. You've been pushed into that. It's really difficult to go into town to visit the small independent shops because parking in there is difficult. There's free parking at the out-of-town superstore. Everything's been arranged for the profits of the big multinational companies and not for the benefit of the public. And if we pick up the smoking issues for a second, the issue I voted and was very much calling for the ban on smoking in all of those outdoor seats, which are, of course, the seats that have been moved from inside where smoking was banned. And we have staff who have to operate in that environment, have to serve those customers, facing all of the stresses and the difficulties of COVID-19, with the extra threat of passive smoking, which we know is bad for people's health and which they have, if you're a worker and that's your job, you have absolutely no choice about. So I would say that we've had a nanny state that's been really great for nursing along multinational companies, rich individuals, we could get into tax dodging, etc. as well. Why is that so? Well, we have a real problem with the the huge role of lobbyists in our government. We have problems with astroturfing, lobbying what looks like independent citizens groups that are really backed by big multinational companies with huge amounts of money to throw around. We have a real problem with a society that's insufficiently democratic, and where I hope perhaps we might be able to find quite a bit of agreement on this evening. Britain is not a democracy. The Tories won control of the lower house, control of the House of Commons with 42% of the vote. Most people didn't vote Tory. The House of Lords is actually more representative of the views of the people than is the Commons. Companies are ruling. We, the people, need to take back control, get a functional political system, control society, control the companies, so we need to deliver something that's healthy and fit to live in for the 21st century. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Natalie. Now, what we'll do, we'll speed through all the speakers quite quickly so we can get to the floor as quickly as possible. Then people can ask questions either of the panel or make some points which the panel can come back to. So I'm going to go straight on to, because I know we'll come back to several of the points that you raised there, Natalie. I certainly don't want to fall out with you this evening, so I'll keep well out of it. So let's get on to Brian. Now, Brian Monteith is a former spokesman for Forest in Scotland. Like Natalie, he's both a politician and a journalist. He was a member of the Scottish Parliament from 1999 to 2007. Thereafter, he became a columnist for The Scotsman, for which he still writes a weekly column. Last year, Brian returned to active politics when he was elected to the European Parliament as a member of the Brexit Party, standing down with every other UK MEP in January 2020. In his time, Brian has also edited a website called The Free Society, which Forrest set up about 15 years ago. And he is the author of 2 reports for Forrest. One was called The Bully State, The End of Tolerance. And the second one was called Nanny State, How Scotland is Becoming a Puritan's Playpen. As you can see, Brian likes the use of alliteration. Anyway, a pipe and cigar smoker. He's also a dedicated bon viveur. So welcome, Brian, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Simon, and Rob as well. The title is whether or not the nanny state has been emboldened, and I'd like to suggest it has under the current COVID-19 pandemic, but that it has also, the pandemic has also revealed a number of weaknesses in the nanny state approach, which I think are likely to see much rebellion and lines of attack. And so I think resistance is likely to build up, even though those that know better than us, mere mortals, are emboldened to do things in our name. So what I mean by this is that we can see that, as Simon has mentioned in the introduction, that the experience, I suspect, of Boris Johnson has had no doubt an influence on his approach to prioritising the attack on obesity that the government wishes to bring out. Whether it's the right methods to do it or not, we can have further discussions. But I think his own experience has made him prioritise that issue because of his own weight. But what I actually see is not so much the Prime Minister blundering through as the influence of the nudge unit that the government has in this whole treatment of the COVID pandemic, and that then spilling over into further policy. So we can see there's obviously a lot being written and a lot more to be written about how this government, the media and various interest groups and the opposition have tackled the debate about the pandemic and how to handle it. But it's clear from that writing that the nudge unit has had a significant influence. And it's also clear that the Public Health England has been at the centre of management. It would obviously expect to be at the centre. Public health is its game. But there is also now a good deal of disquiet as to the performance of both the nudge unit and Public Health England, and to the transparency of the decisions, the process that they came about, and whether in fact on many occasions we, the public, have been misled, not just by the politicians, but by their advisors, their officials. So I think that we will see the belief that, well, we've done certain things and we've had powers and we've used them during the pandemic, and that this will embolden those that have advocated the use of power, central power, bureaucratic power. But I also think that some of the failings that will become quite obvious over time, once research and evidence is taken in various inquiries, we'll begin to see that some of this actually has not worked. In fact, some of it will have worked against our interests. And of course, once we begin to see the settled evidence about international comparisons, there is a strong possibility that the type of interventions, the lockdowns we've had in the UK, may have actually been far more damaging than was required in comparison, say, to Sweden. That's a debate that's still going on and will continue to for a while yet. And that has to be put against, of course, the interventions and what that's meant for other health conditions that have gone by the wayside and not been treated. So I see the nanny state as being emboldened, but I also think that public resistance to what people see as overbearing interference in their lifestyles could also grow as well. And so there could be some sort of polarization. I think that it's clear that, you know, there are some fallacies that need to be slayed. And one of the fallacies, I think, that's becoming more and more evident as the Conservatives, in one form or another, be they in coalition with the Liberal Democrats from 2010 or by themselves from 2015, are in power longer and longer and have been in power for the majority of the time of, say, the NHS. The NHS has not been privatised to any great extent. Doctors are in the main private contractors and always were. Dentists are private contractors and always were. The NHS is essentially really about the public health and hospital system, and not what many people might think includes GPs. So the public sector side, I think, has remained a public sector under many decades of Conservative rule, much as though every time there's a general election we're told you shouldn't vote Conservative because it will mean the privatisation of the NHS. Now, I'm not saying that because I'm trying to defend Conservatives, because I'm not one. But I think there are fallacies, and the fallacy that the Conservatives will destroy the NHS in its known form is a fallacy. But the other important fallacy is that they are against the nanny state. And I think we can see that much of what is being described as coming forward by Simon are in fact age-old ideas that were being cobbled together by George Osborne and David Cameron back in their time of opposition. But once they got into power, many of these ideas about advertising, about bans here and there, did not then materialise because they found there was opposition. Yet here we are now with Boris Johnson as Prime Minister and unravelling a programme to deal with obesity, which has much of the same old ideas of banning this and that advertising.
30 more seconds, Brian.
So I do think that tells us something. We can, if we want to stop the nanny state, we can't trust the Conservatives. We have to be emboldened ourselves as individuals and groups to fight every party and convince every party that the nanny state is a mistake.
Great, thank you very much. And we're going to move straight on to Tam Fry. Now, Tam joined the board of the National Obesity Forum in 2005, and he's now their spokesman. But until last week, I hadn't realised that he actually began his career with the BBC, where he worked for 25 years. Now, as a senior director, he worked on productions such as the Apollo moon landing, and was also one of the team that introduced breakfast television to the UK in the early 80s. While he was working at the BBC, Tam co-founded the Child Growth Foundation, and in his own words, he juggled both jobs until 1998 when he left the BBC to run the foundation full-time. And he is currently, I believe he's currently their honorary chairman. In 2007, Tam was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts in recognition of his work. He's also an advisor to the Action on Sugar campaign and is one of the UK's most outspoken campaigners against the spread of sugar into foodstuffs. Welcome, Tam.
Thank you very much indeed for that introduction. I hope that I deserve it. I've not done one of these before, so I'll sort of gently ease my way through, if you will, but I will be short and brief. I'm no intellectual, I'm not an academic at all. I'm, if you will, a doer. And for 20 years, since the Child Growth Foundation, under my direction, introduced BMI charts into the United Kingdom, we have been lobbying government to do something serious about obesity, because we're quite certain that obesity begins young. And if you don't address the youth, which are the future of the country, you are going to miss the boat, because young people, if they are allowed to continue to be obese, continue to be obese adults. My position relating to what is going on now is quite clear. I'm not a libertarian in any shape or form. I welcome the nanny state, because it is by nannying that we are going to see those measures which need to be taken in order to reduce obesity to zero. And we're not going to see them from anywhere else except government. Government is the only person or the only entity that can do something about the food industry, can do something about the advertising industry, and do something about everything which the individual cannot do. In 2007, the idea that it was down to individual responsibility that we have an obesity epidemic was blown out of the water by the Foresight document. The Foresight document, which was the end of 2 years of research sponsored by the Secretary of State for Health, said quite categorically that the technological innovations of the 20th century was such that it was nearly impossible for people to remain in a healthy weight. And that the only way out of it should be that we change direction and introduce measures which will do exactly what need to be done to reorganize the obesogenic society in which we live. That was, I'm afraid, not adhered to by the Labour Party, although they said nice things about it. In fact, the government's chief scientific officer at the time said that the notion of being able to do anything is ridiculous, and we've got to take concerted action to review it and reform it. Having said that the Labour Party did nothing, I have to also say that unfortunately, in my opinion, the Conservatives and the coalitions did next to nothing too. I happen to be a fan of George Osborne because when he delivered his 2016 budget, and I was monitoring it to see if he was going to come up with anything about obesity, the pen fell from my hand when he announced, totally unforewarned, that he was going to do something about childhood obesity and sugar. And sugar, as Mr. Clark has kindly said, happens to be a specialty interest in my box. And I jumped up for joy and said, this is wonderful. How is he going to do it? And how he is going to do it was to be, for the first time in 20 years, tough with industry. Industry had been playing around with government, twiddling it around their fingers since beginning of the Labour Party accession in 1997. This was the first time that somebody had the gall to stand up and say, I'm going to change things, and I'm going to give you a bit of time, 2 years, to sort yourself out. And if you don't do that, I'm going to levy you at 2 standards. One, if you've got more than 18 grams of sugar in 100 grams. And secondly, a lesser tariff, a levy, if you have only succeeded in removing 5. And everybody thought that was ridiculous. That was never going to happen. The food industry had for years been saying it is extremely difficult to reformulate either drink or foodstuffs as a result of the low-fat craze of the 1970s. But what happened? Well, what happened was that the boardrooms of all the companies sat around on the morning of the 17th of March and said, we don't want to pay the government a penny more than we absolutely have to. We will now reformulate. And within 2 years, which is remarkable, most of the companies had reformulated in the sense that only 2 colas now exist in this country, which were as they were in 2016. Everything has been reduced, and 38% of sugar has been taken out of our soft drinks in circulation. That has got to be stupendous news. In fact, it's a double whammy in a sense, because the government now no longer receives the levy in the full estimated 450 million, is only now receiving something like 190. It's got to find money to do the things that it had promised that the levy would actually finance, but that is seen also as a success because at least we have got rid of this dreadful sugar out of our consumption. we were then told also, slightly earlier than that, by the Conservatives also, that they would treat the individuals who run the drinks and food industries in the United Kingdom like they were private individuals. And they should have individual responsibility to sign pledges that voluntarily they would do something to remove the high fat, high salt, high sugar from the foodstuffs that we were being offered. That failed because, to a man, the responsible managing directors and CEOs of the company actually reneged on their pledges. And the reason they could do that was it was voluntary. And the thing that we have got to take away from this hour session with you is that voluntary measures, when it comes to obesity, will not work. They have to be mandatory. And the sooner we have mandatory measurements, the better. When Theresa May, I'm sorry, keep on calling her Margaret May, Theresa May was ousted from office, we had our ears ringing with the fact that Jeremy Hunt and his people said that what they were going to introduce would be draconian, groundbreaking, fantastic changes. What we got was a whimper. And whether it is a good or a bad thing, Boris Johnson entered St. Thomas's Hospital intensive care unit and came out a changed man because of his brush with death. It took that one thing to revolutionize the thinking in Downing Street and in Whitehall. I regard that as being unfortunate for Boris Johnson, but the result of that, I am sure, will start to show that the government has got the message that obesity is such a problem in this country that only stern action from Westminster will actually improve matters. So, if you will, I'm against libertarianism. I think that we are, for 25 years and even more, 50 years, been consuming and drinking more than it is good for us. We drink 20%, eat 20% more than we really should. We've got to bring our calorie count down to every meal. And what I can see now
10 seconds, Tam.
Is that is starting to take effect. So I rest my case. Boris Johnson plus libertarianism, no. And if Johnson is going to meet his desired objective, which is to halve childhood obesity by 2030, he's got to start tomorrow.
Okay, thank you very much. Hopefully there'll be 1 or 2 libertarians who want to come back and argue with Tam a bit later on, but that's great, Tam. Thank you for joining us this evening. And our fourth speaker is well known to many people who've joined us this evening. Claire Fox is director of the Academy of Ideas and founder of the annual Battle of Ideas Festival, which in recent years has taken place over 2 days at the Barbican Centre. And the great thing about the Battle of Ideas is that it encourages opinion from right across the political spectrum, the cultural spectrum, the social spectrum, and it really is open to everybody to have a proper debate. And that actually is, again, why I'm very pleased that Tam and Natalie have joined us this evening, because we think it's important to debate with people we don't necessarily agree with, and to have this sort of discussion. And it's a great shame that so many of what I would call our opponents refuse to share a platform. So I'll just say it now in case I don't get a chance to say it later on. Thanks to Tam and Natalie for coming along this evening. Anyway, back to Claire. For many years, Claire was a regular panellist on BBC Radio 4's The Moral Maze. In recent years, she's become a regular guest on programmes such as Newsnight, Politics Live, and Any Questions. Last year, like Brian, she was elected to the European Parliament as a member of the Brexit Party. 10 days ago, it was announced that she'd been awarded a peerage, which has provoked considerable debate, I think it's fair to say. Now, I can only speak for myself, but I was personally delighted to hear the news. Claire has been an enormous friend of Forest for many, many years. She's spoken at a great many Forest events, including events in London, Dublin, Bournemouth, Birmingham, and even Brussels. So we're delighted that she can join us again this evening. Over to you, Claire.
Thanks, Simon. yes, if I wasn't controversial enough, you have now decided to completely thwart any chance I'm ever going to see the red benches with your Forest acclamation. But so thank you very much for that. Good start. Yes, in some ways, the Nanny State is, by the way, my internet's rubbish, so I hope I'm clear. In many ways, the Nanny State is, we're living through it at the moment with lockdown. In some regards, this is my worst nightmare. You know, that the state has taken over many of the choices that we as individual free citizens make. But I understand that in the spirit of social solidarity and for the benefit of the public's health and in face of a real pandemic, that certain measures were required. And even though I think they've gone on too long, and you could have an argument about when the lockdown was, how strict it was and so on, whether Sweden was right, all of these different things. I am not somebody who thinks that at no point should there ever be an intervention by the state on a health issue, and COVID is a perfect example of that. But what's extraordinary is that many people would have this to be an ideal state in order to ensure that we are protected from ourselves in terms of health, and that's where I really object to the Nanny State. I, for many years now, have felt that Public Health England should have been abolished. And one of the reasons I wanted Public Health England to be abolished was because of its intervention into our lives to lecture us about lifestyles. But I've changed my mind on this. I've now realised that Public Health England might actually be a really important organisation, because it should have been the organisation that, for example, organised testing in the midst of a pandemic, or supplied PPE for NHS or care staff. But guess what? Public Health England, when asked to do the real job of protecting public health in the midst of a real pandemic, has proved to be pretty useless. It feels far easier and far more at home lecturing us about lifestyles, it seems to me, than doing the real job of Public Health England. So that's been a revelation. One of the things that Public Health England has preached in terms of its nanny statism over the years is that bad health is a result of bad behaviour. So when this pandemic started, there was great fuss made by many people in public health circles and lots of people who are adherents of the Nanny State about this virus and the likelihood of who would suffer the most from it. And it was assumed, as it was a respiratory virus, as we understood it, that smokers would be the most likely to succumb to COVID-19. It was actually such a huge disappointment to so many people in public health circles and nanny state circles to discover that actually, if you're a smoker, you're actually less likely to succumb to COVID-19. And you could see a kind of like disappointment because this did not follow the script, which is that somehow health has become linked to behaviour in such a moralistic way that there was a sort of rueful sense of, well, how come you lot aren't going to get it? Because you're the bad guys in society. And I think in that way, the moralisation of lifestyles is something to be wary of, because I do think it's taken a very moralistic and judgmental form. And I'm therefore disappointed that Boris Johnson has now been it's kind of led to something which is the most serious virus, or a serious virus that's taken over the world in terms of COVID, that therefore we now end up back to a lifestyle blame by focusing on obesity, just because the Prime Minister succumbed to COVID and then decided that this had something to do with his weight. And I think that the launching of this obesity strategy has been completely unhelpful in helping untangle what really is at the bottom of COVID-19, who we should be protecting, and so on and so forth. The strategy on obesity is called Empowering Adults and Children to Live Healthier Lives. But I think it's the very opposite of empowering. And really, that's the point that I wanted to make about the nanny state. Because once the state decides that it can look after us better than we can look after ourselves in all regards, and remove our choices and intervene in our lifestyles in this way, it basically infantilizes us, and it plays a terrible game of blaming people's lifestyles for the health that they are in. That is the way it happens, you know, that in some ways this discussion about obesity ends up assuming that somehow, because people are eating the wrong food, that they are to blame for getting COVID. And it seems a horrible conclusion, a misanthropic conclusion. And, you know, you will even hear people talking about fat people bankrupting the NHS and so on. And we're familiar with some of that more anti-humanist, misanthropic, miserablest outlook from Nanny State days, when people say that people who are obese or people who are smokers or what have you shouldn't be allowed to have NHS treatment. That's been kind of floating around for a while. But also, does it work? Just a couple of sort of thoughts on it. One of the things that's been suggested in the obesity strategy, for example, is that we should list calories on everything when we go to restaurants. Everything should be listed up so that we can make our choices. But I want to draw attention to the fact that the only time that I really had, when I went to university a million bloody years ago now, there was a big calorie chart on the front of the fridge. I didn't even know what a calorie chart was, telling us what every food substance in the fridge, what calories it had. And it was, you know, it was some slimmers who had taken it upon themselves to do this. That is the only time in my life that I put on weight at a rate of knots, because I became obsessed with calorie counting. I became obsessional about what I was eating in an unhealthy way. And I would suggest that one of the things we have to be wary of is this kind of encouraging young people to become obsessed about their body weight. And I actually think it's unhelpful that young people are kind of entering into this joyless and shaming atmosphere. So I don't find it empowering or liberating at all in any sense whatsoever. I also think, by the way, that the attacking on cheap foods, when, you know, the buy one, get one free is underlined, things made expensive, you get less food for your money and so on, just seems to, you know, basically food to be made more expensive so we don't eat as much of it, seems to me to be completely, talk about not reading the room, or inappropriate at a time when the economy is on the brink of depression, when actually people are worried about whether they'll have a job, whether they'll be able to cope with even buying any food at all, whether people are having to go to food banks and so on, facing unemployment. It just seems entirely inappropriate that the focus of a government should be to tell us that the solution to all our problems is that we have to, everything's going to be more expensive for us. This seems completely misplaced. So although Natalie talked about, you know, big business and all the rest of it, it seems to me that, as usual, ordinary people will pay the price. And Larry Elliott today in The Guardian, I didn't agree with all of it, but he made the point between socio-economic factors, whether you're poor or not, basically, and obesity anyway. So he suggested that maybe the way to solve the obesity problem was to actually make sure people weren't poor. And as we're on the brink of more and more people being poor, it seems to me that penalising the poor in this way is just totally wrong. And finally, then, I think one of the things in the obesity strategy is also that you go to the doctor and that they prescribe gym membership or bike riding or what have you. And again, this seems to me to be a distortion and a perversion and a real prostitution of the health service. We're in a situation at the moment where people, because they gave up going to the doctors and to hospitals because they didn't want to drown the NHS out because of COVID and so on, and sacrificed in many ways going to health service, are now in a situation where when they even go to the doctor, they're more likely to get a lecture about their weight and their lifestyle, and then to not even get any medical intervention, but in fact a lifestyle intervention. And I think it's completely the wrong way to go about things, particularly because if you want to know at the moment why many people have put on weight in recent months, or why I keep seeing all these things about, you know, people have got to do something about their weight, they're drinking too much, they're sitting at home and eating too much. Well, that's because we've been in lockdown. That's because we've actually had a real epidemic that we've had to deal with. And actually, we're being told that we're not to leave the house anymore. I mean, we still felt guilty if we go on unnecessary journeys. I mean, the way that, in fact, most people actually control their weight is because they have an active lifestyle. Not necessarily that they go jogging, but they have a normal life where you're running around doing things. But actually, if you're confined to your flat with your kids and you're told you're not to go out and so on, that does have an impact. And we've had nothing else to do but eat and drink. But the kind of joyless Puritan still want to pile the guilt on, and it just seems totally inappropriate to me. So what I'm worried about is that at the end of all this, that people are treating the lockdown as the new normal. that the state has taken upon itself a range of powers to deal with a pandemic, and that these are now going to be seen to be the way that all health interventions are dealt with. And I'm worried about the nanny state with its condescending paternalism actually having a really damaging impact on us. And, you know, what I worry about is not, you know, the big business, but I worry about ordinary people's agency, their ability as free citizens to make decisions about their own lives, to take risks. Because despite the fear factor that's emerged around COVID, I do think that living a full life requires that we as grown-ups decide what risks we're prepared to take. And I doubt that, and we're not living in a very positive thing, so I'm very nervous. The one thing that I agree that Brian said earlier, though, that there is a challenge to some of this, just to finish with is, in the midst of all of these things, in my arguments around the nanny state for some time, whether it's passive smoking or obesity or any number of things, I'm constantly told that I have to look at the science and the evidence. And if we've learnt nothing else in this period, it's that the science and the evidence does not exist. That actually, often these things are more confused, not as binary. There is not the evidence or the science. There's arguments amongst behavioural psychologists, nudgers, never mind epidemiologists, and so on. And it's involved more and more of the public, because we've got nothing better to do than to take an interest in what evidence, which epidemiologists, should we just do what the experts tell us, which experts are we to listen to? Not all the experts agree with each other. And I at least hope that that will sow a spirit of resistance where people will not just bow down and acquiesce to being told the experts tell you to live your life this way, but actually query that far more. So a bit pessimistic about the state we're in, but know that there's a spirit of resistance to that, because I suppose in my Brexit hat, I would say that if I heard nothing else during the campaign for leaving the European Union, forget whether you agree with that or not, I heard a lot of people say that they were fed up of being treated and done to, and they wanted to take control of their own lives and regain some sense of agency and be treated as equal citizens. And I'm hoping that that spirit of don't patronise me, don't treat me like a child will come back with some vigour, and therefore we can resist the growth of the nanny state.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Claire. Now, I'm very conscious that Natalie, sitting there in France, must be thinking, well, I haven't had much chance to say anything. So we are going to come back to you, Natalie, and give you a good chance to respond to some of the points that have been made, so that everybody's had a sort of an equal say. I don't know if Rob is there. I had a little private note from Rob saying that his internet connection is playing up a bit, which could cause us problems because he's the mastermind in terms of bringing the audiences in and pressing all the right buttons. I mean, one thing I do want the discussion to talk about is something in the way that Tam brought up, because basically Tam is against voluntary measures. And yet, take smoking, for example. The biggest drop in smoking rates over the last decade has not been because of restrictive measures like the smoking ban. That had hardly any effect on smoking rates. But it's actually because of the introduction of the success of e-cigarettes, which between 2012 and 2016 or 17, actually, a significant number of smokers switched voluntarily. They weren't forced to go to e-cigarettes. They did it voluntarily. And I do think that if you try and force people to change their lifestyles, often they will rebel. Claire herself, I mean, I remember years ago, I can't remember what the issue was, but Claire came out with a statement when she said, I'll be reaching for my fags in defiance. Now, I don't smoke, but I feel the same way about weight. I mean, I'm obese, and I know I've got to lose several stone, but I don't want the government forcing me to lose weight. And if I feel I'm being forced to lose weight, it might be childish, but I will actually dig my heels in and tell them where to go. I will do it in my own time and at my own pace, not because I'm being forced to do it. And we see this a lot with, for example, the so-called roadmap to a smoke-free England in 2030. Again, Natalie, I'd like you to come back to this, perhaps. I mean, some of the measures that they're talking about, for example, Natalie, yourself, you're in favour of a tobacco levy on the companies. But we all know that levy will be passed on to consumer. I think Claire made that point a minute ago. The consumer will ultimately pay. and the consumer will be further impoverished as a result. Same thing with higher taxation. The Tobacco Control Lobby we've already got punitive taxation. 90% of the price of a packet of cigarettes is basically tax, and yet the Tobacco Control Lobby want that taxation raised even more, pushing families further into poverty. Then let's talk about reducing the prevalence of shops where you can sell cigarettes. We'll have further restrictions on smoking in public places and further denormalisation. This whole word denormalisation I really object to. So I want to get other people in here, but Natalie, if you'd like to come back at some point to some of those issues, and I'd like to have this general sort of discussion, talk about what should be voluntary and what should be forced. I know we've got some vapors on the line this evening. Maybe they could say a few words, because I do think vaping, in its way, has been a great success story. And it's been a success story without any sort of indoctrination or people being forced to change their behaviour. Rob, are you there?
Yes, I am, Dory. I had a few internet problems. I got kicked out, but I'm back now. So if people do want to contribute, please just use the raise hand button that I mentioned earlier. Go to participants, and there should be a box there for raise hand. Otherwise, try waving at me. Oh, yes, Tina. Hello. The floor is yours. If you could unmute yourself.
Whoops. Oh, that's my computer.
Hello. Are you all right?
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, I'll come to Pat, and then I'll come back to you, Tina. So Pat,
Okay.
Nurse, can you unmute?
Hello. Can you hear me okay?
So Tina, you're...
Is it me?
Yeah, I think your microphone is...
Hold on, I'm turning...
Pat, are you there? Yeah.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, there were just a few points that were raised there, and I kind of raised it in the chats as well. One, I just find it really, really patronising, and I'm sorry, Natalie, but to mention single parents to push this obesity thing. I was a single parent with 3 small children, and I can tell you that my budget was very, very tight. I literally used to buy a stack of potatoes and a tray of eggs, and with a lot of imagination, that was basically our food budget for the week. So, you know, all this rubbish about, you know, I'm so pathetic and stupid that I can't walk past an aisle with chocolate in it. You know, I looked at my budget. Did I have enough to buy chocolate? No. I've never liked sugar, so I guess, you know, in that sense, I'm quite lucky. But I'm also from a family where half of us are fatties and half of us are skinnies. It's just the way we seem to work out. And the fatties have been on diets all their whole lives and never lost weight. And the skinnies, despite, you know, me personally trying to put on weight, I even follow fat people around supermarkets to buy what they buy, thinking maybe I'll put on another stone. No, it doesn't work. And I'm sorry about that, but I just don't think that this one size fits all actually fits everybody. And that's the problem with it, in my own personal view, is we're all different. We're all genetically different. We all think differently. We all have kind of different lifestyles. So to try and push us into one thing, don't eat this, don't eat that, go out on your bike, do some walking, do some swimming, you fat bastard. You know, that is not a message that is going to come through and help people, you know. It's stigmatisation of fat people, and that's cruel. You know, I'm a smoker. Well, I haven't got a cigarette in my hand. People don't know I'm a smoker. Therefore, I can be left alone. But if I'm a fat person, I'm carrying that weight around. And what the government, and I'm sure anti-obesity campaigners, you know, this is not what's in their mind, but this is what is resulting of it. People are looking at fat people and they're disgusted by them. What on earth kind of society have we become when we stigmatise people because of what they look like, or even because of how they live their lives? You know, and as a smoker who's been stigmatised now for 30 years probably or more, you know, bearing in mind I am a smoker of 52 years, and I'm sorry I'm not ill, and I'm sorry I'm not dead, and I'm sorry I was a child smoker and that I've had no problems with it. I'm really, really sorry about all of that. But I am as angry as hell at being stigmatised for no other reason than I'm not quit, I'm not ill, I'm not dead, and I swear I have never harmed another living person in my whole life. That includes the 4 children I've got and the 6 grandchildren I've got now. And I'm so angry about it. I sometimes think I'm going to spontaneously combust, and that's the way I feel today, listening to all of this. And as I said, I'm sure these people are trying to help, but these days, when you hear the word help, especially in regards to smokers, we know what they mean is force. We must force smokers to quit. We must do this, all this, all this to force smokers to quit. Well, I say, leave me alone. This is my life. I will not be bullied. I had bullying at school when I was a kid, so I know exactly what it feels like and I know exactly what it sounds like, and I've had enough. So get off my back and leave me alone. That's all I want to say.
Well said.
Okay, thanks. I'll give Tina one more go. Tina, go ahead. You're live on air. Tina, have you gone? Hello? No, okay, I'm going to have to move on. So, Jude, if you could unmute yourself.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Pat. She's awesome, isn't she? I agree with everything Pat has just said. I just wish that these so-called experts who have so much knowledge that the rest of us fail on, they're just awesome. They leave me gobsmacked. If they could put their sanctimonious do-gooding into bringing back things like home ec. I was brought up by a mum who could cook. I can cook. My children can cook. From the very basic foods, like Pat said, potatoes, eggs, fresh vegetables that can all be got. There is this preconception that everybody on a low budget, and believe me, I was brought up on a low budget. Our early married life was on an extremely low budget. Neither of my children are overweight. I am. Nothing to do with what I eat. It's actually a medical condition I can't control. But I'm stigmatised because I'm fat, obese, gross, and a smoker. But like Pat, I'm still alive. I have no health issues from my smoking. So how these people dare sit there in front of an audience like this and patronise us from the beginning of the day to the end of the day, it disgusts me. Like I say, if they put as much energy into doing something really constructive than they do just judging other people, you might get on a little bit.
Excellent.
Hello, Liz. Sorry, I was on mute myself.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, this whole COVID thing. I think it's proven to be a rich testing ground for compliance, unfortunately. And there's been a whole lot more compliance than I would have liked to have seen. A whole lot more people perfectly willing to be terrified to death and then accept whatever they've been told that they must do in order not to die. And you know, we've seen it all, you know, the staying in and the masks and the hand washing, and then we'll shut down this, we'll open that, we'll open this, but we'll have to shut that down again. You've seen, you know, people absolutely hysterical if you come within, you know, 2-3 foot of them, this sort of thing. And I think that there's something of an experiment, or certainly an observation possibly going on here, where the government will go, oh, we managed to get, you know, 90 whatever % of the people of being complying, and we'll threaten the others, or we'll find the others who haven't complied, and you know, we can widen this scope. They're already onto it now with regards to the vaccination. I'm sure you will not be unaware that you know, Boris was talking a couple of weeks ago and calling people who won't get vaccinations nut jobs, and yesterday, I think it was, or the day before, I lose track, you know, they're already talking about what percentage of the population will have to have the vaccination. Now, you know, I'm not necessarily against vaccinations. Whether I'd be wanting one that had only been tested for 5 minutes is a different matter. But so I don't come from the point of view of being against them. But it's just interesting to me that the campaign has already started, it would seem. And I just wonder if given the nature of this particular pandemic, something that has hitherto still been left to parental discretion and choice is going to be taken away on the basis of public health, public good. And as I say, as Pat rightly said, as we've been saying for years, it started with the smoker. And, you know, the government of any colour now seems to think that they have complete sway over what I do to my body, what I put into my body, whether or not I take it round a jogging track. I don't. But, you know, I even wonder if part of the reason that they don't teach domestic science is because people might innovate a bit and put a bit too much in, or actually, you know, serve out their own portions that could be too big. It makes you wonder why it isn't being taught. And instead, you know, you've got proscribed ready meals or family meals with whatever amount of fat, sugar, salt, taste taken out of them. And, you know, the vast majority of the population never having been encouraged or taught to actually go out and, you know, cook something for themselves, which they can stuff full of as many calories as they wish and put as much salt on as they choose to as well.
Okay, thanks very much, Liz. I remember Harry Enfield talking about how much he enjoyed Findus lean cuisine, especially when he had 3 of them at a time. Natalie, because you've been the subject of a little bit of criticism, perhaps could I just take you briefly, just to give you a chance to respond?
Yeah, certainly. And actually, I'm always looking for points of agreement. So I'm going to begin with agreeing with Liz and Jude about home economics, about cooking classes, about people having access to the chance to cook for themselves. And, you know, I don't necessarily exactly agree with Liz's why they might have been removed, but of course it is to the benefit of the multinational food companies and the fast food companies if people don't have developed those skills. But one of the things that was exposed during the horse meat scandal was the fact that we, on average, eat twice as many ready meals as people do in the rest of Europe. We also have the second longest working hours behind the Greeks. We have double the average commuting time that the rest of Europe does. And so we have people who, you know, when you've done a 10-hour shift at work, you stagger off the bus after a 2-hour commute. Then, you know, no, you're not going to sit down and cook a slow-cooked vegetable stew, and I entirely understand why. And, you know, those are all things that we need to create the space that people can cook for themselves. And so maybe we can agree on that. But I do want to pick up what Claire was saying briefly about smoking. And, you know, it's understandable why the medical people would have thought at the start of COVID we didn't know much about it, that it would be, you know, would hit smokers harder, given the fact that actually it's the leading cause of premature death, of a preventable premature death. It kills more than 200 people a day. And half of the difference in life expectancy between rich and poor can be put down to smoking. This is absolutely an issue of poverty and inequality, and that's, you know, deeply concerning. And a lot of discussion has been about choice. Well, 50% of smokers say they want to give up. The government hasn't given them the tools, the capacity, the support that they need to give it up. That's their choice. That's what they'd like to do. And 70% of people who smoke say that they wish they'd never started, most of them as children. So, you know, what the government is seeking to doing, and why we should be seeing the tobacco companies putting more money in, is that actually this is a way to reduce smoking to below 5%. You know, I'm not a prohibitionist, you know, looking at other areas, other types of drugs. I don't believe on the war on drugs. I think all drug use should be treated as a health issue, not as a criminal justice issue. What we want to see is actually, you know, a situation where we have a healthier society, where people can choose as adults not to smoke, as most people will do overwhelmingly. Then, of course, we save huge costs on the NHS. You know, smoking costs £12.5 billion a year to society. It doesn't get paid back from taxes. It has to be balanced out. You know, so many things: unhealthy food, externalised costs, companies making large profit, all of us paying the price.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to Barry next. If you could unmute yourself.
Okay, I thought I'm Barry. I'm an American. I live in Denmark. I thought I was going to speak a little bit earlier and just kind of say welcome to our guests. And I don't think I've ever seen this many people here before. And I would just encourage other people to, hey, you know, get up and say something. I really don't have a planned speech. I will just sort of say what I wanted to say, something I've sort of observed about the nanny state over the, as it's been developing over the past couple of decades, is it seems to require a very remarkable, they can achieve the goals they want, but they can do so with a very remarkable lack of anything that resembles discipline. They just basically say, you don't do this, and you can't do this either, and you don't, and you don't, and you don't, and you don't, and that's not allowed. No, you can't do that. It's easy to tell people not to do something. What's difficult is trying to get people inspired to do something, if I'm expressing myself correctly. It seems to be easy. You can't do this anymore, and you can't do this anymore. You can't smoke on the bus. You can't smoke on the ferry. You can't do this. You can't. It's so easy, isn't it? And it just keeps on going. And now, with all due respect to Lady Bennett there, I just see this trend continuing. Now it's obesity, now it's food. What's next? It keeps on going. Now, no sugar product. Now, huge warning labels on a Snickers bar. Excuse me? You know, the level of craziness just continues ad nauseum, and it'll just keep on going. Why? I think it's because it's so easy for these people to do that. You know, oh, what about the lucrative side of it? You know, the taxes you have to put on. Well, just rake in the money. Boy, surprisingly, no one has thought of that angle earlier. But anyway, that's kind of what I wanted to say. Doesn't seem to be much discipline involved in the whole thing, does it? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Barry. Tony, could you unmute yourself? Hello, Tony. Could you unmute? There we go. Hi, Tony.
Thanks, Barry. I agree. Everything we hear is negativity. You can't do this, you can't do that. I absolutely agree with everything that Claire has said. And
can't hear.
And hey, can't hear. Sorry. Oh, everything that Liz has said and Claire has said. But I do take issue with Tam and his love of the nanny state. His feelings to abolish or at least severely reduce sugar has just become another tobacco, really. It won't be long before we have obscene drawings on foodstuffs and things about what this on that foodstuff is going to do to you. It's still the same thinking, the same mind-bending thinking that they employ. That's really all I wanted to contribute to that. I'm dead against the nanny state in any form. I grew up with a love of sugar, like all small boys, but it's never been an issue. I just loved sweet stuffs, and I still do. And I eschew anything that says sweeteners or non-fattening on them. I just won't have anything to do with that because it tastes all abominable. If I'm taking some sweet drink, I want it to be sweet. I just won't have too much of it. That's all. It's self-discipline. That's what it all comes down to. We are our own masters. Let's have education by all means. Let everybody know what these things do and how you should be cautious with them, but leave the decision up to the individual. That's all.
Okay, our final call for those little blue hands for people who want to speak. I'll take Pat briefly, and then if no one else wants to speak, I'll bring the panel back. Pat.
Hello, can you hear me okay? Yeah, good. I just wanted to sort of come back to Natalie about the cost of smoking to the NHS, etc., whatever. I just don't agree. I'm sorry, I don't agree. I don't know anybody close to me who smoked who's ended up costing the NHS more than anybody else. In fact, of those smokers, the ones that have died are the ones who have died in motorbike accidents or in other circumstances, actually. Drinkers, a couple of them have been drinkers, and the drinkers has sort of come them to the end. But really what I wanted to make was this point about the cost of the NHS. I have smoked since I was 8 years old, and I know that's shocking, and I don't say it as a badge of honour. I say it because it's a fact, and it's probably a fact of my generation and not so much today's generation. But here's the thing, I've paid tax on that product since I was 8 years old. That's 52 years I've paid tax. I have not had yet a single penny back in smoking related healthcare, not a penny. I've been in hospital because I fell off a horse and broke my arm, and I was in there for about a week. I've been in hospital to have babies like everybody else, but I have never been in there for any smoking related illness. Now, should I get one any time from now in my life, then frankly, it's quite churlish not to refuse me any kind of treatment, which is, you know, we've discussed, this is the way things are going. It's despicable, actually. So, you know, I am sick of paying for the healthcare of people who don't smoke while being stigmatised and discriminated against by people who are trying to now exclude me from health services that I have paid for all of my life. And that's just on tobacco tax. That's not even counting my national insurance from all the decades I've worked. So again, leave me alone. Stop bullying me. Stop trying to exclude me from everywhere. I am never going to quit. I'm not one of those childhood smokers that Natalie talked about, you know, who are victims or anything else and now want to quit. I'm very happy with my life. Very happy. I've had a normal, balanced, healthy life, and I just want to be left alone. And I'm sick of people using that argument about the cost of the NHS. It's not even true. And when you look at the figures, you can see it's not even true. That's all I want to say.
Okay, thanks very much, Pat. Right. So maybe I could start with Brian. Do you want to sort of come back with some thoughts or respond to some of the points that have been made?
Yes, I think there's been a lot of good value in many of the comments that I've heard. I particularly agree with the issue of people being able to cook their own meals. That should be something that is encouraged and learnt in an early stage. I think, although I'm not in favour of directing how schools should teach, I would certainly, as a parent, want to send my children to a school that had that in the curriculum at an early age. And I'm a grandfather now, and I encourage my grandchildren to learn how to cook. And hey, it does involve sugar, because that is something that gives them a taste for cupcakes. But it's from the cooking of cakes and scones and pancakes that they then move on to making their own dishes with vegetables and other ingredients. So I'm all for that. And I'll just finish by saying that not only do we need to have the opportunity to learn so we can make valued and informed choices, but that means we also have to have complete openness and freedom of speech and freedom to access information, because people will be surprised if they start accessing information when they find out that lung transplants that are carried out from lungs from deceased smokers are actually more successful than lung transplants carried out from lungs from people who didn't or never smoked. Why is that? It just seems to go against the science. Well, that's because a lot of the science is indeed disputed. Just as people who drink alcohol can expect to have a longer life expectancy than people who are teetotal. In fact, you can drink quite heavily, the statistics show, before, not that I'm recommending that, but before you actually have a higher likelihood of death than someone who's teetotal. So as Claire Fox said, the science is not settled, and one of the reasons the smoking ban came in was because there was a belief that the science was settled, that secondhand smoking was hugely dangerous. And I think that there were ways that could have been tackled, rather than just banning smoking indoors, or banning smoking because it's on a seat that was indoors that's taken outside. That's a new one to me, I've not heard. Smoking ban for musical chairs, it would seem. So I think more education for people so they can make informed choices is certainly far better than punitive rules of the nanny state.
Great, thank you very much, Brian. Tam, your point of view wasn't wildly popular with the audience. How would you respond? Could you persuade a few people to change their mind? Hi, Tam. Oh. Oh,
He's gone for a drink.
I'll come back to Tam in a minute. Hopefully. Right. I'll take Claire. If you could unmute yourself.
Thanks, everyone. Obviously, we have to be aware something of an echo chamber, so I'm aware of that. And it's good to hear the other side of the argument. It's important to have these discussions. So just to say that, one thing is, I think that as far as I'm concerned, smoking is a nasty, dirty habit that I have acquired.
Oh, no.
And some people might say, no, I'm unapologetic. That's fine. I'm not proud to be a smoker, or it's not a lifetime achievement. I smoke, and I'm probably one of the people that Natalie cited who says, I wish I'd never started because it cost me a lot of money. I wish I'd never started, and I don't want to give it up. But I'm not a hapless addict who needs somebody else to deal with this. I have choices. I'm a grown-up. I choose to carry on smoking. And as I think Simon mentioned earlier, I've been gratified that so many people have given up smoking because they've taken up vaping. Some of the people have just given up smoking. I don't encourage every young person I know to smoke. And it's distinctly not good for your health. It's just that I do quite a lot of things that are distinctly not good for my health. My end goal is not health all the time. When I work very hard, I'm sure I'd have a much healthier life if I didn't work hard, and so on and so forth. And so I don't want to make a virtue of smoking. That seems to me to be the wrong response. If people want to do that, that's fine, but that's not my view. It just seems to me that there's no balance on this. One of the things that I learned, and I did learn things from being an MEP in the European Parliament, one of the things I learned about the European Parliament was how tolerant they were of the minority of people who smoked. So they provided indoor smoking rooms for all the MEPs in the European Parliament who smoked. It didn't bother anyone else. It was a perfectly reasonable way to behave. And as it happens, they might have supported the passing of legislation that would demonise smokers throughout Europe. But as MEPs themselves, they recognise that in a working place like the European Parliament, you might need somewhere to go and smoke. Good idea. Why don't we have that? Instead, what we see is a relentless attempt at banning smoking in more and more places that encroach on our private sphere as well. And so it's not just that we're not allowed to smoke at work or whatever, it's relentless, and it goes on and on. Just my only other thing is on ready meals. Everybody's decided it's a good idea that everyone's taught to cook. A nice idea. Natalie made the point that for many people, they have long working lives, and you get home and the last thing you want to do is cook. So maybe we should think about tackling it that way. I look at it slightly differently. I have cooked more in the last 3 or 4 months than I've ever cooked in my life because I'm stuck at home and I haven't got a life anymore, right? That's really what's happened to me. I'm not going out much, so I cook. There's nothing wrong with it. I don't object. I'm a hopeless cook, by the way. Nothing wrong with it. Well, can I just defend ready meals on the basis
Yes.
of women's liberation, never mind any other moment, right? The truth of the matter is that convenient food, such as ready meals, has been a great important step forward for many women to go out to work. Not everybody wants to spend hours at home cooking the latest delicious, healthy food. Sometimes you want to live a life and slump in front of the telly with a glass of wine and a ready meal, because actually we've been engaged publicly in the public sphere, and that was a step forward. So I don't want to end up demonizing ready meals. They have their place and they're perfectly nutritious. My concern, as I said before, is the people who haven't got enough food to eat. The people who are actually, food is nutritious. We need food. People need to be able to eat. This demonization of certain food as junk food, dangerous food, frightening food, salty food, sugary food, all the rest of it is, in my opinion, not based on evidence or science, and also moralizes lifestyle choices that we're more than capable of making ourselves. So, you know, I need to get off this call soon so I can go make a bloody ready meal. Just to indulge myself in it.
Okay, Natalie, I'll give you a chance to come back again on some of the stuff that's been said before we wind up. So, Natalie.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate that. And I just do want to particularly come back to Pat, that, you know, I have never said, the Green Party has never said that anyone should not be treated by the NHS for any reason. It should be there, free at the point of need, to everybody who needs it. And that's totally where I'm coming from and will always be coming from. But I think, well, let's start with something else that I agree on with Claire. That dieting is not the answer, and that simple calorie counting, and, you know, I'm not at all in favour of the government proposal to send people off to Weight Watchers. Other companies are available, because the evidence is that that doesn't work. 99% of people who go on a diet actually end up at the same weight, going back to the same weight or more than what they were at the start. What we need to do is establish healthy habits, which is where I disagree with Claire about things like doctors prescribing exercises, gym. If doctors work with patients who've chosen to do that, the evidence is that that's what can make real difference to people's lives. As indeed could, you know, if we reduced working hours. And, you know, I've been a feminist ever since age 5, but, you know, I would question why Claire thinks it has to be the woman who's doing the cooking. But, you know, it's a question of choice, and at the moment we don't have free choice because of the way that society is structured. And, you know, picking up Pat's point, she said that in the past that it was cheaper to cook and eat healthy food. The fact is that turned around. There was a study widely reported a couple of years ago that now a healthy diet is 3 times as expensive as an unhealthy diet. The cheap processed stuff, cheap fast food is actually cheaper, and, you know, people who are really struggling naturally buy those foods. And so, you know, that choice point also, what Barry was talking about, the seats. And, you know, of course, those seats are tended by waiting staff. I mean, I was at a pub yesterday in London, and, you know, the waiting staff are now all coming to the tables rather than people going to the bar as a COVID precaution. Now, I don't want those staff, most of whom will statistically be non-smokers, be forced into breathing in pathogen smoke to keep their job, to do the job they're doing. You know, we're talking about, you know, things like bans on indoor smoking have protected the vast majority of people who are non-smokers. So, you know, I'm very concerned about choice. I'm very concerned about health. I'm very concerned about opportunities for people. And, you know, if we actually look at going back to smoking, for example, you know, the fact is that actually the highest levels of smoking are among the most disadvantaged groups. People with a severe mental illness, 40%. Homeless people, 77%. This is a huge cause of great suffering in our society. It's a huge cause of inequality. As I said, the leading cause of premature avoidable death, and it's twice as bad among, it's a cause of twice the level of premature death among the poorest groups in society compared to the wealthiest. So, you know, I think a government that acts for the people and not for the multinational companies and their profit, that's what I'm standing for.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, Natalie. Strident defense of your position. Right, now, so with no further ado, I'll hand back to Simon to sum things up.
Thank you very much, Rob. I'll keep things very brief because I know we've overrun a bit, but I'd just like to thank everybody, including our audience tonight, because actually that hour and a quarter or so has actually gone by incredibly quickly because, you know, it's been a fantastic debate. And we needed both sides of the argument, plus the audience had a chance to have their say as well. I noticed that I haven't a chance to read them, but there's almost 200 comments have come up. I don't know if they'll still be there to have a look at a bit later. But again, everybody's chipped in, which is great. So I will thank, first of all, Rob for moderating this evening's event. I'd like to thank Brian, Claire, Tam. Most of all, I'd like to thank Natalie because she's over there in France. She's broken into a holiday to join us. She's been given a bit of grief, but taken it very, very well. So thanks to both Natalie and Tam for, you know, entering the Lion's Den and engaging with us, which has been fantastic. Thanks, I say, to Brian and Claire, to Rob, and good night to everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Simon.